The morning Cecily found the man lying face down in the snow behind the food bank on Pemberton Avenue, she almost walked past him. She was 11 years old, small for her age, wearing her mother's old wool coat that dragged at the hem, and a pair of rubber boots 2 sizes too big because her sneakers had given out in October. It was the kind of February cold that hurt your ears and made the inside of your nose feel like sandpaper. She had her head down. She was thinking about whether there would be enough bread left at the end of the day for Mrs. Poulin next door, who was 83 and couldn't walk to the food bank herself anymore. That was the only reason. Cecily cut through the alley. She always checked the back bins on Tuesdays because the olds in bites boxes by the service door instead of throwing them in the dumpster. It saved her the embarrassment of going in through the front. She almost didn't see him. He was wearing a dark coat, expensive, the kind with a real wool collar, and he was lying very still in the narrow gap between the dumpster and the brick wall. For one terrible second she thought he was dead. Then she saw his breath, a small pale cloud rising and dissolving in the frozen air. Cecily stood there for 3 full seconds. That was how long it took her to decide. She crouched down beside him and put her hand on his shoulder. Sir, you need to wake up," he groaned. His face, when he turned it toward her, was bruised along the left cheekbone, and there was dried blood at his temple. He was maybe 60, maybe a little younger. It was hard to tell. Gray at the temples, a face that had probably looked distinguished once, and now just looked exhausted and hurt. "Can you sit up?" Cecily asked. She was already looking around for something to put under him, something dry. She found a flattened cardboard box and pushed it under his legs without really thinking about it. It was just what you did. Her mother had taught her that, back when her mother was still teaching her things. The man's name, she would learn later, was Walter Crane. He was 58 years old. He was the founder and majority shareholder of Crane Pacific Holdings, a real estate and development company based in Vancouver with assets worth close to $4 billion. He had 2 homes, a driver, a personal assistant, and a seat on the board of 3 charitable foundations. None of that was visible in the alley behind the food bank on Pemberton Avenue at 7:15 in the morning. What was visible was a man who had been robbed. His wallet was gone. His phone was gone. One of his shoes was missing. Cecily noticed this with a kind of practical horror, because she knew what it meant to lose a shoe in Canadian winter. His coat was still there, which meant whoever had taken his things had been in a hurry or had been scared off before finishing. "I need to call someone," he said. His voice was slow and confused. "My phone doesn't work," Cecily said, which was true. The screen had cracked in November, and the data had been cut off in December when her mom couldn't pay the bill. She used it for the camera sometimes and for the alarm in the mornings. That was all. "There's a payphone on Burrard. Can you walk?" He looked at her like she was a very strange apparition. She supposed she was. A small girl in an oversized coat, crouching in an alley, completely calm, asking if he could walk. "I think so," he said. He couldn't really. Not well. He got up with her help. She was surprised by how much help he needed, but she'd helped her mother in and out of beds and chairs and cars, enough times that she knew how to make herself useful as a counterweight. And he leaned heavily on the brick wall and breathed. "My name is Cecily," she said, because it seemed like the right thing to do. "Walter," he said. "Okay, Walter. The payphone is about 1.5 blocks. Do you think you can make it if we go slow?" He looked down at his feet, at the one shoe, at the sock on the other foot, already wet through. "Here," Cecily said, and she reached into the bakery bin and pulled out a plastic bag, the kind they wrapped the loaves in, and she helped him put it over his sock and tuck it into the top of his one remaining shoe as a makeshift barrier. It wasn't much. It was something. "You've done that before," Walter said. "Yeah," said Cecily, and she didn't explain. The payphone worked, which was a small miracle. Walter called his assistant, a woman named Patricia, and Cecily stood nearby trying not to listen but also making sure he didn't fall over. He looked like he might fall over. He kept touching the cut on his temple and wincing. When he hung up, he leaned back against the phone booth and looked at her with clearer eyes than before. The cold was waking him up. "How long were you in that alley?" Cecily asked. "I don't know. I remember leaving the restaurant on Hornby. I remember someone asking me for directions." He stopped. "That's all I remember." Cecily nodded. She'd heard of that before. Someone asking for directions, drawing you close. then hitting you when you weren't expecting it. It happened near the shelter on Prior Street sometimes. She knew not to walk with her head down near certain corners. These were things she had learned. "Someone's coming?" she asked. 15 minutes, he said. "Okay." She shifted her weight. The cold was getting into her boots again. "I'll wait with you." He looked at her again with that same strange expression. "You don't have to do that." "I know," Cecily said. They stood there in the cold together, not talking much. Walter asked her name again, and she told him. He asked if she went to school nearby, and she said yes, Strathcona Elementary, though she was usually late on Tuesdays because of the food bank run. He didn't ask why she was making food bank runs. She was grateful for that. After a while he said quietly, "Your boots are too big." "They're my mom's," Cecily said. "She doesn't need them right now." Walter Crane, who had spent 30 years in business and prided himself on reading people quickly, understood from the way she said those 6 words that there was a great deal she was not saying. He didn't push. He filed it away in the part of his mind that was already, despite the headache and the shock and the cold, paying very close attention to this small girl in her mother's coat. The SUV came 8 minutes later, Patricia in the passenger seat, a man named Derek driving. Patricia got out and immediately began doing what Patricia always did, taking stock, managing, pulling a first aid kit from the back. Derek stood by the door looking large and concerned. Patricia looked at Cecily. "Is this who called for help?" "She found me," Walter said. "She got me to the payphone." Patricia looked at Cecily, the way adults sometimes looked at Cecily, quickly calculating something, landing on an expression that was careful and kind. "Thank you," she said. "Can we drive you somewhere? To school?" "It's okay," Cecily said. She had the bread to collect still. She had Mrs. Poulin's loaf, and the soup kitchen on Hastings opened at 9, and she'd promised to bring the bag of canned goods her neighbor Mr. Bertucci had left outside his door. She had a whole morning mapped out in her head, and none of it involved riding in a warm black SUV. "At least let us get your name," Patricia said, "so we can reach your parents, to let them know you helped." Cecily hesitated. She gave her name. She gave her school. She did not give her home address or her phone number, because she had learned to be careful about which adults got which information. It was nothing personal. It was just a rule. Walter, still leaning against the SUV, watched her walk back toward the alley where she'd left the bakery bin. She stopped, picked up a box of bread loaves, 8 of them, neatly stacked, and tucked it under her arm like it weighed nothing. Then she walked away down Pemberton Avenue with her 2 big boots slapping the frozen sidewalk and her coat dragging at the hem. "Who is that child?" Walter said, not really to anyone. Patricia, who had already started typing on her phone, said, "I'm going to find out." What Patricia found out over the next 2 days was this. Cecily Marsh was 11 years old. She lived in a second-floor apartment on Prior Street with her mother, Joanna, who had been diagnosed with MS 4 years ago and had been in a significant decline since the previous winter. Joanna Marsh had been a nurse once. Now she had days when she could move around the apartment with her cane and days when she couldn't leave her bed. She received disability benefits. She had no family nearby. Her own mother had died when Cecily was 2, and Cecily's father had left before Cecily started school and had not been heard from since. Cecily cooked, Cecily cleaned. Cecily did the grocery run and the pharmacy pickup and the food bank visit and the laundry and the dishes. She did these things before school and after school and on weekends. Her teachers had flagged her lateness 3 times this year, and each time Joanna Marsh had written a note explaining that they'd had a hard morning, without elaborating on what a hard morning meant. Cecily's grades were, despite everything, good, especially in math. Walter read the summary Patricia had prepared and sat with it for a long time. He was not a sentimental man. He had not gotten to where he was by being sentimental. He had been raised by a father who believed in self-sufficiency and a mother who believed in efficiency, and he had built a company on those same principles, and he had made a great deal of money, and he had also, somewhere along the way, stopped noticing things. He noticed things now. The headache helped, paradoxically. It slowed him down. He thought about the plastic bag over the wet sock. He thought about the bread loaves under her arm, 8 of them, and the matter-of-fact way she'd picked them up like it was nothing unusual. He thought about the way she'd said she doesn't need them right now, and the silence around those words. He called Patricia. "Find out what she needs," he said. Not what I want to give her, what she actually needs. Patricia, who had worked for Walter Crane for 11 years and had learned to interpret his moods with some precision, said, "Understood then. All of it, Walter said. Cecily came home from school that Thursday to find a voicemail on the apartment's landline. They still had a landline because it was cheaper and more reliable than a cell plan, from someone named Patricia Yuun, who said she worked for a Mr. Walter Crane, and that Mr. Crane wanted to express his gratitude for Cecily's help on Tuesday morning and would like to speak with her and her mother if that was possible. Cecily listened to the message twice. Then she went and sat on the edge of her mother's bed. Joanna was having a medium day. She was propped up against pillows and watching something on the small television in the corner, and she looked thin and tired, but her eyes were clear. "Mom," Cecily said, "I found someone in an alley on Tuesday." Joanna turned the TV off. Cecily told her the whole story: the man in the snow, the payphone, the bread box, the SUV. When she finished, Joanna was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You should have told me Tuesday. You were having a bad day Tuesday." Joanna looked at her daughter, this small, serious girl with her father's dark eyes and her own stubborn jaw, and felt the familiar ache that came from being too tired to be the parent she wanted to be. "You're always taking care of things," she said softly. "Somebody has to," Cecily said, and she didn't mean it harshly. She never meant things harshly. It was simply the way the world had arranged itself. Joanna called Patricia Yuun back that evening. Patricia was warm and professional, and said Mr. Crane would very much like to visit, if that was agreeable. Joanna said she supposed it was. Walter came on Saturday. He came alone. No Patricia, no Derek, just Walter in a plain coat and sensible boots, carrying a paper bag from the Italian bakery on Commercial Drive. Joanna made tea because she had a good morning and could stand at the stove long enough to boil water. Cecily sat at the kitchen table and watched the two of them, with the careful eyes of someone who had learned that adults often behaved strangely when they were trying to be kind. Walter looked around the apartment. He didn't do it the way some visitors did, with pity. He did it the way someone does when they're memorizing a room, quietly, quickly, cataloging. They talked. He asked about Joanna's condition, and Joanna answered straightforwardly because she had long since run out of energy for being coy about it. He asked about Cecily's school, and Cecily answered about math class and about the reading project she was doing on the St. Lawrence River watershed. At one point he asked Cecily simply, "What do you want to be?" Cecily thought about it seriously before answering, which he noticed. "I want to be an engineer," she said, "civil engineering, so I can build things that help people get to places." "Bridges," he said. "Roads too," she said. "But yes, bridges." Walter Crane had built real estate for 30 years. He had funded infrastructure projects. He had sat in 100 boardrooms with 100 engineers. He looked at this 11-year-old girl who got up before dawn to collect bread loaves for her neighbors and said, without any sentimentality at all, "You'd be good at it." Cecily looked at him steadily. "I know," she said. Joanna, watching from across the table, felt something in her chest loosen very slightly. The offer Walter made was not a gift. He was very clear about that, because he was clear about most things, and because he had thought carefully about what kind of help was actually help, and what kind was just a way for the giver to feel better. He had a property on the east side, a duplex he'd been planning to renovate and rent. He proposed that Joanna and Cecily move into the upper unit at a rent tied to Joanna's disability payments, adjustable as circumstances changed. He proposed to arrange, through a foundation he actually ran rather than just sat on the board of, for a home care worker to come 3 mornings a week so that Cecily's mornings could be her own. He proposed to set aside a trust, not large, he said, modest, for Cecily's post-secondary education, structured so it would be hers at 18, regardless of what happened between now and then. He asked for nothing in return. He was very clear about that too. Joanna said, "Why?" Walter looked at his tea. "Because your daughter put a plastic bag over my sock in an alley at 7 in the morning and stood in the cold for 8 minutes to make sure I didn't fall over. And when my car came, she picked up her bread and walked away without asking for anything." He paused. "I've had people work for me for 20 years who wouldn't have done half of that." Joanna looked at Cecily. Cecily was looking at the table. "Cecily," Joanna said quietly. Cecily looked up. "What do you think?" This was something Joanna always did, even on bad days, even when it would have been easier not to. She asked Cecily what she thought. She had been doing it since Cecily was 6. It was, Cecily understood now, the most important thing her mother had ever done for her. "I think," Cecily said, slowly, "that we should say yes. And I think we should say yes because it's a fair offer, not because we're desperate. Because we're not desperate." She paused. "We're just tired." There was a silence. Walter Crane, who had not cried in a very long time, not since his own mother's funeral 14 years ago, looked out the kitchen window at the February sky. "That seems right," he said. The move happened in March when the worst of the cold had backed off, but the city still had that gray-blue bruised look it gets when it can't quite decide if winter is finished. The duplex on Napier Street was not large, but it had 2 real bedrooms and a bathroom with a tub wide enough for Joanna to use safely, and a kitchen with a window that looked out at a maple tree that was, in March, still bare but stubbornly present. Cecily stood in her new bedroom, her own room, the first she'd ever had entirely to herself, and looked out at the maple tree for a long time. She had spent so long arranging the world around her mother's needs, around the food bank schedule, around the pharmacy hours and the bus routes, and the neighbor who needed bread and the other neighbor who left canned goods by the door, that she had almost forgotten to think about what she herself might need. She was 11. She was allowed to need things. She had just gotten very good at not noticing. The home care worker's name was Alicia, and she came Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 a.m. and stayed until 9. She was from Edmonton originally and had a laugh you could hear from the next room, and she called Joanna Joe after the second visit, which made Joanna smile in a way Cecily hadn't seen in a while. On the first Monday with Alicia there, Cecily woke up at 6:30 out of habit, lay in bed listening for sounds from her mother's room, heard Alicia already moving around in the kitchen, and slowly, carefully, did absolutely nothing. She stayed in bed until 7:15. It felt like the strangest luxury she had ever known. She and Walter saw each other most Saturdays, for a while. Not because it was arranged, or not formally, but because Cecily started visiting the food bank as a volunteer rather than a recipient, and the food bank was 3 blocks from Walter's office, and he had gotten into the habit of walking on Saturday mornings after his physiotherapy appointment for his hip, and their paths crossed more often than probability would suggest. He was not a replacement father. He was careful about that, and so was she. He was something harder to name, a person who showed up, who asked questions and listened to the answers, who had looked at her in an alley in February and seen, clearly, who she was. He came to her school's science fair in April. She had built a small model of a cable-stayed bridge using wire and balsa wood and had written a 12-page report on the engineering principles involved. She won first place in her category. Walter stood in the gymnasium with a cup of weak coffee and looked at the bridge and at the report and did not say, "This is impressive for your age," because he understood that she did not want to be impressive for her age. She wanted to be impressive, full stop. "The load distribution on the North Tower is slightly off," he said instead. Cecily looked at it. "I know. I ran out of time. What would you have done differently?" she told him. In detail. He listened. Joanna, sitting in one of the gymnasium chairs with her cane across her knees, watched her daughter talk to this man about cable tension and anchor systems and felt something she hadn't felt in years, the particular, specific peace of knowing that someone else was paying attention, that she did not have to be, for this one afternoon, the only one. Summer came. Cecily started at a new school in September, a middle school with a stronger STEM program, which Patricia had quietly researched and flagged. Cecily took the bus. She got there on time. She came home and did her homework and helped Alicia with dinner prep. On the days Alicia stayed late, and sometimes she sat with her mother and watched the Nature Channel and ate crackers with peanut butter and didn't think about the food bank roster or the pharmacy pickup. Because those things were handled now, and she was allowed to just be. She was 12. She was allowed to just be. It took her a long time to believe it. The following February, exactly 1 year after the alley, though no one had quite planned it that way, Walter had a small dinner at his house in Kitsilano. Not a party, just a dinner. Patricia, his sister Marjorie, who was visiting from Halifax, Joanna, and Cecily. Joanna wore her good blouse. Cecily wore the sweater her mother had gotten her for Christmas, green, with small white stars at the collar. Walter made pasta because it was the one thing he cooked reliably and he knew it. After dinner, When Joanna and Marjorie were talking about something at the other end of the table, Walter refilled Cecily's water glass and said, quietly, "How are you doing? Honestly." Cecily thought about it the way she always thought about things, genuinely, taking time. "Better," she said. "It took a while to feel like it was real." "What do you mean, like?" She turned her glass slowly. "When things are hard for a long time, you sort of stop believing they'll get better, not because you're giving up, just because you learn not to count on it. Because if you count on it and it doesn't happen, that's worse." She paused. "It took a while to let myself count on things again." Walter nodded slowly. He thought about the months after his divorce, 12 years ago, when he had built a wall around the parts of himself that hoped for things and convinced himself it was wisdom. "Yes," he said, "that's exactly right." They sat for a moment in the particular quiet of a warm room in winter, with good food recently eaten and voices nearby. "I counted on you," Cecily said. "Eventually. I want you to know that." Walter looked at her, 12 years old, the green sweater, the steady dark eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart," he said, and his voice was a little rough and he didn't apologize for it. In the spring, Cecily entered a regional engineering competition for middle school students. The challenge was to design a pedestrian bridge for a fictional municipality with a limited budget and specific load requirements. She worked on it for 6 weeks in the evenings after homework, at the kitchen table with graph paper and a second-hand calculator and her library card, which she had filled to capacity with books on structural engineering that were mostly written for adults. She placed second in the province. The judge's notes said, "Remarkable clarity of reasoning. Candidate demonstrates intuitive understanding of the relationship between structural elegance and practical constraint. Recommend for advanced program." Patricia framed the notes. Joanna cried. Walter looked at the framed notes on the wall of the Napier Street duplex and felt, not pride exactly, because pride was something you felt about your own accomplishments, but something adjacent to it, something warmer, the feeling of watching a person become who they were always going to be. Cecily, for her part, was already thinking about the next competition, about the mistake she'd made in the anchorage calculation, about how to fix it. She was 12 years old. She had a bedroom with a maple tree outside the window. Her mother was having more good days than bad. There was bread in the kitchen that she had bought from the store, with money, like a regular person, and there was no need to check the bakery bin. She was allowed to look forward. She was allowed to want things. She was allowed to be 11, no, 12 now, and brilliant and serious, and sometimes, on good days, when the maple tree was coming into leaf and her mother was laughing in the next room and the afternoon light came through the window at that particular angle that made everything look like it might be okay. She was allowed to be happy. She was learning how.